This is Brink, a game that kind of looks like a sci-fi area control, but is also kind of actually a worker placement. And then it also has some cube management with constant trading. A lot of trading leads up to a hidden vote at the end of every round. This is a lot of things in a game. Essentially, Ivy Studios hits us with their biggest game so far, which is mixing a lot of different genres together. It's a bold task for a game, with players placing ships on hexes, trying to get resources to help their end of round vote, which is done secretly. There's abilities, upgrades, and just cards galore, and yes, a lot of trading. It's about 1.5 to 2 hours as listed on the box for 2 to 5 players. We played it 3 players and then 4 players. Oh, also, this is a prototype. These frog counters are not part of the game, even though they're adorable. Brink is also in the same universe as Moonrakers, which means that when we're playing, we're all originally an outlaw faction in a spacefaring universe. And in Brink, we're once again figuring out who will emerge victorious to unite the factions. Woohoo! As we're on the brink of reviewing this game, we do want to point out that this is a sponsored review from Ivy Studios, but as always, here at Shelfside, we never compromise scoring. But as always, if that bothers you, you can click off now. But now let's get to the how to play. Goal is to get the most VP by the time 3 rounds are over, which each round consists of 3 turns for each player placing their ships onto the board. The main way to get points is to do well in the hidden vote at the end of each round, aka first or second place aligned with colors your ships are at. You get points equal to how much power you have in each hex, multiplied by something for that round. Other ways to get points are to get more of these ambassador cards, get a faction objective to make your cube resources worth more at the end of the game, or get to the end of this ship upgrade track. I know that's a lot, it'll make more sense as we get into the turns. So all you do is take one of your different ships and place it down on the board in a blank area. Your smallest ship goes in the middle of hexes, medium ship on the edge of 2, and big ship between 3 hexes. You can also explore new hexes, they just have to be next to face up one. Once you place your ship, you get the cube income of each hex you're touching. Here it'll be 1 yellow and 2 orange. You get the 1 yellow in your supply, but not the orange, because you see how the orange has a white outline on the hex? This means that these orange cubes must be traded this turn to other players, and if not, they'll get discarded. You can trade with anyone, and you can only trade influence, which are cubes, or favors in the game. By the way, the cubes are hidden all the time, and they're basically types of money in the game. Purple is a wild cube and can be anything. Then, do you see the icons on the hexes our ship is touching? This means you get to do those actions. Here, let's decide to draw 2 action cards, then discard 1. Action cards can be used for the front, usually during your turn, but also as a cube that has to be spent during 1 turn. The other symbol we get is a rider, meaning you draw 1 and play 1 from your hand of now 2. And riders are big because they modify the vote at the end of a round. Here, let's modify the green color, and you get 3 cubes back if it wins first or second place in the vote. Besides symbols you just place your ship on in a round, you can do free actions like using ambassador or faction objective abilities you've bought earlier. Alternatively, you can buy a faction objective, but they're real expensive. That's a turn though, just placing a ship, getting the cubes from it, and then doing any symbols you've triggered. Other actions we didn't get to explain this turn, but are important are upgrading your ship by spending cubes, or getting to buy an ambassador by spending cubes. But wait, you don't want to spend that many cubes because at the end of the round, it's time for the hidden vote. And you secretly spend cubes on the colors you want to win, namely where you have ships at. Purple is worth 2 points for any color too. Then you reveal and see which color had the most votes. Ties are broken through the top of this rider deck. Then people get victory points according to which colors got first and second. Reset the board by taking back ships and discarding riders, and now it's time for the next round. That's basically the game. One last thing before moving on, if you ever have to take cubes from the supply and you can't, there's a revolt, and everyone has to discard half of that color they're holding, round it up. Pros! Component pros time, and does Ivy Studios knock it out of the park with components? This prototype has multiple trays that are also kind of like inserts when you put the game away. Each player gets one of these trays that hold your cubes, and also your voting tray if you want. There's a section to put your unused ships and cubes to trade away, so you don't get those mixed up. This screen fits in your tray and hides your cube count exceptionally, which is vital for voting. Many upgrades also have their own area to slot in, where when you reach a level, you just grab the thing. But wait, there's something underneath, so you can put components away so cleanly when not playing. As for the minis, each of them feels great and are totally distinct in the hand to let you know which one you're about to put down, because they do have different power levels. They also fit nicely with upgrades, and even the second tier ship has room to slot in this fusion drive upgrade if you get it. Mostly in this game you'd be touching the cubes though, and man are they awesome to touch. No mold of them is the same, and just are great to look at, touch, Put in the trays, yum 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 with these cubes. Oh yes, their own tray is great, holds the hexes in, and even has its own lid. You won't need any plastic bags at all to put away Brink. You also get card trays for the smaller decks, and then to showcase all these faction objectives, with minis slotting in at the top. There's even a space for the hex too. Lastly, for components, Brink has a very consistent look with the sci-fi futuristic style with some glossy areas on the board. Maybe Tron Legacy comes to mind. There's cards looking like they're from some holodeck dashboard. Even the rulebook and player aid has this IP address at the top margin, probably fake address. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty with the gameplay cons. The first one is that Brink poses a nice twist with the worker placement. You got 3 different workers in forms of ships, whereas most worker placements only have one type of ship, and these all scale up in how many resources they get, and also how many points you get at the end of a round. You can pick these in any order, so there's a basic trade-off of do you play your big ship early to get a lot of power in these colors now, or save that for later when that board's more established and you have a better idea of what you want. But even collecting is not that simple, since you're getting cubes at the top of the hex and then actions at the bottom of the hex. You have to weigh your income for that turn with the actual action, and remember, color for the end of round voting matters. A classic example is making sure you're just getting enough cubes this round to upgrade your ships when you do the action. Speaking of cubes, that gets us to the first umbrella of gameplay pros, the cube management in the game. Let's first talk about the revolt mechanic, which gives players agency on other people's cube stashes. To go more in depth with this revolt explanation, revolt happens because there's a finite amount of cubes for each color. Once that runs out, there's going to be a revolt when someone tries to get more, probably when someone tries to get cubes from the board. So it's an intentional worker placement to revolt. Then everyone loses half their supply of that color. Discarding a half is a huge deal, cutting everyone's voting potential for that round. And them also discarding half gives you a lot more information on how much they have left. Wait, so then you can't just hoard as many cubes as you want until the end game vote. Rather, you should be spending more deliberately. Or if you do have a lot of cubes, make sure that general supply is loaded, or that hexes aren't open for someone to revolt. Here's a fun game state. Someone got a lot of purple you want from the trade area. Purple's amazing, they're wild. But actually, you might not want to trade for some of them, or maybe all of them, because if no one trades, those purples go back to the supply. So less risk of a result to make you lose your purples. Mind you, revolting is not hard to do. An upgraded second tier ship can easily remove 8 cubes of one color a turn, which is half the 3-piece supply. So cubes are normally for just buying stuff and voting, getting upgrades, spend cubes for them, but they can also be worth points end game. They can be, not always. If you buy a faction objective by spending a lot of that cube, now those cubes are worth 1 more point. Secondly, if that cube has won first or second place twice in the game, then that cube is worth 1 more point at the end of the game. If that color wins first or second place 3 times in a game, that cube is now worth 2 points. This means that some colors will just become more valuable throughout the game, and it's up to players to anticipate that change and hoard appropriately. And of course, you can make that color revolt to make other people lose points. Ha ha ha, I calculated my revolt making them lose more points than I lose points. Oh wait, do you see how we marked which colors scored, aka getting first or second, by putting a cube there? That means the supply is a little bit smaller too, so it's even easier to revolt as the game goes on. Lastly, for cube management, you'll notice that each action card, which do all sorts of things, also have this cube color on them. So now there's a constant trade-off between spending action cards as the card or using it as a cube to spend on a turn. The nice gameplay pro is how they did the voting at the end of each round, which again, voting is the main way to get you victory points in the game, and there's a lot added onto this to make it feel tense every round and different from round to round. First off is the riders, which you play during a turn via this action, where you draw 1 into your hand of 1 and then play 1. Then you can pick what color you want to manipulate. And these really influence how the round will go. Like if a color does not place, trigger revolt, holy cow. Or purples cast for this color are now increased by 1 in voting power, so it's even easier to bump this up. Or everyone gets rewarded by scoring a color if it ends up getting second place, but more on riders later on. Now, when we get to the actual voting phase, there's nice mind games onto thinking how many votes a certain color will get. The wild card is from the purple, which can be any color, and of course is worth 2. So it's possible for someone to dump all their purples into one color to try to boost it up. You're really gauging which color you think each player wants to get first, and then second, and then contributing as little as possible while making sure it still goes towards your outcome. Cause these cubes are my precious. They're usually points late game, and if not voting power next round, so you're not spending if you can help it. Oh, even after you reveal, it's not the end all, because there are ambassador abilities to spend a cube, then dump 3 more cubes inside, giving incredible flexibility if you choose to buy that. But if multiple people have that type of ambassador, oh my goodness, the swings the vote can go. Then there are also action cards that can modify the vote by +3 or -2 last minute. The combination of all these things mean that voting results can utterly baffle you, but there's still a lot of ingredients to reward you for reading the group right. There's consistently a lot riding on the voting phase because it is the main way to get points. It's not surprising that the final round has a lot of tension. Oh yeah, speaking of ramping up tension, let's talk about progression pros. The first is that the map will just become a lot bigger as you play the game and people explore. There's going to be about 2.5 to 3x the size of the original map, and now there's just way more decisions on where to place your ships. Holy cow. Ships getting stronger is also quick ramp, where you can either double your power via railgun or double their cube income. And let me tell you, doubling the cube income for your biggest ship is bonkers income late game. Bam, place it down, get a buttload of cubes. Faction objectives being bought at about the mid game mark also changed the game significantly. This purple one adds a purple hex, meaning it's a wild space on the board, so that's wild power people can easily score. Or this shield lattice that boosts that area by +1 power. Or the UA flagship to basically negate that, which -1 power the space it's on. Or getting the fusion drive to boost your second tier ship, so now you can spend a yellow to move it. And everyone else can spend 3 yellow to move theirs. So now yellow cubes have a new usage. Then we already talked about how the cube management gets more nuanced as the game goes on. So let's just talk about the final pro, which is replayability. And there's some pretty good replay value here. There's about a dozen unique ambassador cards to experiment using, like using colors as different colors, or getting to move your small ship by paying a small nominal fee. Then there's even getting rewarded off of taking other actions. Even the repeat abilities are all different colors. Similar goes for the rider cards. There's some pairs, but a lot of uniques, and you definitely won't see much of them during one game. And of course, they can be any color you'd like. Oh, and since you're making the map as you play, look at all these permutations of things. Sometimes you play and you won't be exploring much too. Sometimes you will be super explore. Cons. Component cons time, and we gotta start with the rulebook. Now this is a prototype rulebook and it was mailed to us separately outside of this box, and there's a couple of confusing things. Do purple cubes get to be used for any color for endgame scoring? Yes. How do we do timing for ambassador ability and action cards during the voting phase? Doesn't say in the rulebook, and it kind of just hints in the player aid that we're doing it in turn order. Apparently they're still experimenting with this, but we play with turn order and it worked fine. Or what the heck, double border hexes are worth double power? Technically it says in the rulebook in a somewhat disguised line. This should be more clear here and should also be noted in the voting section. Oh, also for this action card, it says that you should be able to trade any 3 cubes for any 3 cubes. Yeah, I'm definitely sure they're not talking about getting 3 purples this way because that would be broken, and this needs to be clarified. Now for the rest of the component cons, and here there's going to be a lot more leeway in how they're weighted for scoring because I'm really feeling the prototype woes. Because red looks like pink for cubes. Yellow cube income on the hexes also look orange. Yellow looks orange. Oh, but wait, there's an orange color faction that looks like the yellow hex. We start to think, is it even good to have yellow and orange in this much regularity in the same game? Like, why not replace one of them with white? There's no hex that looks remotely white anyways. Some other component cons that don't feel like strict prototype woes are how small the darn text is. Like the text on the bottom of the action card. This font isn't that easy to read already, and when printed on the board, it's not great for a big game. One surefire example of this is the faction objective board text, where how am I supposed to read this if I'm not sitting super closely to it? We would recommend this text just put on a card that is handed out to everyone the moment the objective is achieved. Then while the player aid is good, why not put something on the back of the player screen? It feels like a wasted opportunity. Yes, I know we're playing Brink, I don't need to see it here. Why not put ways to get points or what the faction objectives do? Oh wait, that would work. Lastly for components, the color scheme decisions are weird. You're playing as a color that is the exact same color as things in the game. So if you're playing as orange, you're triggering the exact orange hexes, ambassadors, objective, you're getting orange cubes, even though you being orange has no effect on these gameplay elements that are the same color. This is just initially confusing for players. Why make it the same color if it's not related? You could give player colors some type of 2-tone color or just change the shade. And also, if you're colorblind, I suspect that you'd have trouble distinguishing things in this game. It's now time for gameplay cons. And the first umbrella here is the exploring. Now, we haven't touched on this since the how to play. So to reiterate, it's when you place a ship down and you're connecting to at least somewhere new. You gotta place it next to something you've already explored. Then you draw the top tile randomly, flip it over, and it just gets placed. Then you get the things from both hexes you're touching. You now just get the thing like normal. You just get resources and whatever icons are there. So you're basically completely beholden to the tile flip and can't plan around it. Tiles are vastly different. Some give more resources, some don't give actions, some give more power, and some give no power. This can feel really bad at the beginning for exploring, where you just might not be given very applicable things. Worst case scenario, you get 2 upgrade actions you can't even use. But it's also wacky late game when the conflict for power may seem tight. Oh, well, green seems to be the color to go for this round based off of the rider cards. No more green tiles left. Oh, look, I explored and got 2 green. How convenient. This type of swingy randomness via exploration is fine. It just has to be mitigated more cleanly. Bigger games tend to do this with more time in the game. Like 4X's, where if you get something strong early on, there's a limit on how much you can explore. And then the group will ally themselves against someone quickly if they jump ahead through a great find. Or think about Takenoko, a shorter hex-based game that is not a 4X, and whenever you add a hex here, you draw 3 tiles, then pick 1. And you don't even have to perform that hexes thing, and you can put it anywhere on the map. But for Brink, we're thinking you can't just draw more tiles and pick from that. It's because here it's a worker placement where you immediately get the benefits. And so drawing 3, picking 1 makes exploring a little bit too good. So what we're thinking is just taking exploration out from the game entirely and just having preset maps. Everyone has full knowledge of the map, so they know what to plan for, and then spaces get unlocked at the start of each round. But I do suspect exploring is here to stay with the sci-fi focus, and another con of it is how exploring takes away from the tightness of the worker placement in the game. Now if someone blocks you from colors you want or icons you want, you can just always explore and maybe you'll find something better, but maybe you won't because it's RNG. This is just kind of an inherent clash with worker placement, where if you get blocked off or you don't see places you want, you can just explore for more spaces. And it confirmed my suspicions that blocking wasn't a key part of the game when talking to the designer. But isn't a notable draw to worker placement, or a notable aspect of worker placement, is blocking other people's workers, whether you do it intentionally or unintentionally? Maybe I block you instead of getting the best thing for me, which wins me the game. Perhaps the reduction of blocking in Brink here is to reduce analysis paralysis to keep the game shorter. The next gameplay con is the faction objective balance, where one in particular caught our eye: the blue UA trade agreement, which is underpowered. So the card gets you -8 vote potential with the red/pink cubes, which is fine, but nothing incredible. And then it unlocks the bottom, which adds negative voting cubes on the board that anyone can get. Compare this with the green construct shield lattice, which is a must get. It costs the same quantity of cubes and will give you many additional points come endgame as you choose where the +1 power goes, and you can move it every round with infinite range. What we predict generally happens is that shield lattice gets bought first, then someone buys active war to counter them, which places the flagship to neutralize the shield lattice. Then someone maybe buys a fusion drive to move towards or away from wherever the shield lattice/flagship end up going. Then the purple Discover Cerealia is grabbed by someone who has a lot of purple cubes to try to get some extra points come endgame, as now any of their cubes is worth 1 additional point. Then the UA trade agreement doesn't really have much reason to buy, but we did note in 3P it's stronger because -8 voting power can swing 1 vote. Okay, fine, the pink UA influence cubes do go away at the end of the round, so if you're able to snipe this right before round ends, then yeah, no one can get these. But this is still underpowered, especially compared to construct shield lattice. Some ways to help this card would be to make these red tokens that drop on the board only grabbable by you, and then the card giving you passive discounts and not buying ambassadors because it's a UA trade agreement, thematic that it'll help you get more ambassadors. And then lastly, have a way to scale it up for 4 players. Now let's talk about riders as a gameplay con. You know, the cards that modify voting immensely over here. These are just kind of in a weird spot. First, let's talk about how it works with your hand. So you only have 1 in your hand ever. When you play the rider action, you draw a card, and then you're forced to play a card right away. So if you have a rider card you don't like, you're pretty unlikely to activate the rider space, because that means whatever card you draw, you're just basically forced to play it. Sure, there's some agency getting to pick the color, but is there a better way to approach this? Perhaps a bigger rider hand would swing voting too much because riders are decently swingy and only the person that puts it down gets to influence it. If you got a bunch of action cards in hand, oh, well, play Tourism Enhancement to discard action cards to have them worth +2 votes after voting. Or now my stacked color is treated as any color for voting. Wow, I just get to swing something immensely. What can end up happening is that players early in a round end up playing more riders to try to have more influence on voting because they don't go later in the round. Then they can also just fill up the rider column with 4, so nothing else can be played, and then whoever goes later in the round can just react to these riders. But then if the initial players didn't play riders, then whoever goes later in the round can just play a rider that vastly benefits them. Actually, let's have them not be a card in hand. Rather, 4 of them are flipped over from the deck at the start of a round. You can see each of them, and then when you go to the rider space, you can pay a purple cube to add a cube onto one of them. That way now everyone can anticipate what the rider possibilities are every round, not just, oh, I happen to draw a really good rider card, bam. The last gameplay con is that the quantity of trading in this game feels a little bit forced in because about half of the cube gathering spaces force you to trade them in some way. You feel most of the time railroaded to unload them, otherwise you just lose this. Not to mention that trading on every single turn does add time length to the game. Like imagine playing Catan and half of the time you get cards, you have to trade them away, otherwise you lose them. Oh, also it can be a little tricky to trade with someone not to go somewhere because remember exploring is a thing and who knows what the person might top deck. Oh, also you're not really sure what cubes people are prioritizing for their upgrade path because everyone's build path is a bit different. This can make trades feel kind of uncertain because you're not sure if you're feeding someone a cube they really want. This could be fixed through better player aids. This isn't to say that the trading is bad in Brink. There's still trading interest with a dynamic cube market, with big trades happening before voting sometimes for high moments. But the regularity of having to trade every turn can feel forced and does add time length. That is it for gameplay cons. The last con is with regards to player count. Now we only played it at 3 and 4P, and 3P is definitely the way to go. Because there's only 3 rounds, in 4 players it feels a bit bad if you don't get to go last. There used to be actually a 4-round mode in the game, but then it got taken out, so we have to suspect that 3P was a big part of the design focus. Also, if you play with 3 players, there's less actions before it gets back to you, meaning there's less chances that this rider row will fill up with something that doesn't favor you. Like imagine going in bigger groups and then going first, and then the rider row just gets completely filled up before the game gets back to you. Scoring! Now it's time for a tentative score on this Brink prototype, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons of this game with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And this is a worker placement-ish game with hidden voting, with some worker placement isms with getting power in the right regions. Sounds like a fine idea to me. And so, Brink is going to get a tentative score of 6 out of 10. It's an above average prototype. Component-wise, Brink looks and feels pretty cool, minus the visual jank that we mentioned. And the gameplay is pretty cool too. It has a lot of cool ideas it's exploring that do need some massaging though. You have different ships that double as workers and ways to secure area control. Cubes that have constant changing value where you're highly encouraged to trade them. And there's a dynamic vote to wrap up every round. There's more cool. You can upgrade your ships. You get cool abilities via riders or ambassador abilities or faction objectives. You can even explore the map for technically infinite permutations of maps, but is it even worth a hit to the gameplay to have this many possibilities of maps? When we look at the whole package of Brink, of all this different cool, Brink doesn't really excel at any one category yet. It's not really that good of a worker placement because it's not trying to have blocking in it with exploration. And then exploration isn't really a good fit with the area control-ish ideas, which can really start changing up voting. And then Brink's focusing on the really tense vote, which it does do well if not modified by unfair feeling rider cards. Brink is cool, but flawed. With so much randomness with the cards and then the exploration, this is actually a fairly casual 2-hour game. Yes, even despite all the abilities and the interesting cube trading dynamic. Like look, there's action cards that can give people that action if you tried to block them on the space. But again, blocking was not the intention of this worker placement-ish game. So again, Brink is gonna appeal to a more lax crowd that really likes the theme and table trading and is okay with more things to read and are okay with smaller text. The game is about the looks on your opponent's faces when you revolt and screw them hard, or abusing a rider to make their color suddenly get second place. And heck, that is a ton of player interaction, but it's likely a little bit too intense for someone looking for the next step after, say, just knowing Catan. But if you played a lot of board games and love Catan for constantly trading, the cube market here can appeal to you. But I will point out that going last in the final round is really good, and the whole group needs to be playing around that and make sure they don't get something like Shield Lattice to help them manipulate their power for the last round. But if the target audience is something that approaches games more casually, is counterplaying the Shield Lattice for the last player something that people will be focusing on? I'm not really sure what the answer is to that, but when I talked to the designers, they said they're experimenting with adding a place on the board where you can change who the first player is. And if that's the case, that would drastically change this game. So again, this is a score on this prototype. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about time length. Our games ran a little bit long at about 3 hours each for both 3 and 4 players, and I definitely suspect that these time lengths could go down with experience. I'm not faulting Brink too much for the ballooning time length, as it does say 90 to 120 minutes, but a lot of the time does get eaten up by the trading you're doing on most turns. And if you're planning around this, you want to consider if you have someone that APs the heck out on deciding where to place workers, because man, there's a lot of areas where each of your different workers can go. We also don't know much about the 2P variant where you can play against a rival. We just didn't think that playtesting such a player interactive game with a robot was very helpful for the scope of this review. But hey, you do get to influence the robot by trading with it, and maybe you do have more rider control, so this could be half decent. With more time, with the 3 major gameplay cons being smoothed out, and then obviously you don't have the component woes here, this could be a 7 out of 10 recommender, but yeah, we can only play this version, right? So 6 out of 10, tentative. My personal score for Brink is going to be a 6 out of 10. I have an above average time with it. The first time I played this game, I was like, wow, this is a 7 out of 10. This is a proper gamer's negotiation game. It has a lot of what I'm looking for. It's dynamic maps, lots of player interaction, a way to upgrade your ships, climactic moments at the end of each round, and then it's nice to touch. This game is nice to touch. I didn't really think about the flaws in the mechanics too deeply, as everything was really tied to endgame scoring, and I love it when games feel really tied at the end through your voting shenanigans. That was 3 players, and now fast forward to after our second game 4 players, and my personal score drops to a 6 out of 10. But first, let's start with more in depth about what I like. There's a lot of player interaction with pretty good decision making every turn about where to put your workers, which is always a fun puzzle to think about. Then I have to manage my cubes with the context of the end of the game and then the end of each round. And then I have to guess other people's intentions, which is even more play interaction. I really like how anything can happen in the voting phase, as people play purples differently, and thus I can play around that differently. A highlight moment was when I realized I was perfectly aligned with the other players who wanted first, and I knew Adam would vote enough to get my second color to second place, so I voted nothing. Mahaha. The 2 endgames I played have both felt very tense, and it's really riding on that big endgame reveal, which is probably one of the best, where these climactic interactive moments is probably one of the best things I can hope for when playing with friends. And so I doubt the score will drop much further than a 6 out of 10 while I'm playing this, unless people analysis paralysis like crazy. That just gets me into things I don't really care for. First, I think the game runs too long for what it is. And some of this is our fault, since there's so much thinking about where to put your ship. I've had rounds where I have no idea where to put my stinking upgraded 3rd tier with the permutations of colors and icons. Plus, you can just explore for the heck of it, so then that also makes the thinking feel kind of wasted. Another thing is, the trading every single time you get the white outlined hexes feels repetitive to me. I've been on record saying I don't want to be trading constantly in games, and this almost hinges into that category. This is coupled with the first round not feeling that interesting to me. There's not that much anticipation of what colors are going to be good yet, then you're not sure how the board is fully going to be, so you're just meandering around acquiring resources. Once that hits the first voting phase, I'm interested, but before that in the first round, it's kind of just whatever. It doesn't feel like there's any clear lines on what people are going for. It almost feels like the beginning of a 4X game where there's some 4X exploration, especially with all the components, without the anticipation and knowing of a 4X payoff. Oh yeah, for the exploration, it feels so out of place in the final round. For reasons I said before in the cons, it's like, oh, you just randomly explored somewhere. Oh, also, I tend to ignore the faction objectives besides the purple, orange, and green ones, which I think are actually worth getting. Why is the text so small and things on the game? Oh, I can't really see other people upgrade tracks, so that can make some voting and trading weird. What really sells the upgrade track being off to me is that when you're near the top, you might as well get the extra 15 points for maxing out, because there's not many other consistent areas in the game to get points, which I fear will make the game feel samey to me. This goes hand in hand with there just not feeling like there's enough things to buy in the game for the components. Sure, there's ambassadors, upgrades, or faction objective, but I'm comparing it in my head to other sci-fi games where you can buy more ships, construct buildings, have more upgrades besides just 2. I mean, it looks sci-fi, where are the sci-fi things to buy? This goes into my last point, where the sci-fi element just doesn't come across to me, and so the experience feels dry. I'm fairly disconnected from what's going on, where it's a cycle of just getting cube colors, then trading for other cube colors, and going on colored hexes. Players are just colors as well. There's not even names. There's nothing really for my imagination to wrap around. Where even in freaking Catan, I can say for a trade, sheep for your wood, and there's already a visual. That starts making me think, is there a way to make voting have more restrictions to make it feel more nuanced in the game? Instead of right now you can just freely dump cubes wherever you want, Would that add more interest and enjoyment for me? I'm not gonna overthink it though. But Brink has also made me think back fondly of Eric Emling's The Godfather, a worker placement that also has area control ideas. It does have some RNG with card draws, but it's more control for my liking. And you can kill other people's workers off of completing jobs. And this type of worker interaction is what I'm missing in Brink. And then Godfather still has an end of round type of vote, but that's to get abilities instead of points. And it does have more take that than Brink, with point scoring done so much differently. Brink is a totally enjoyable experience for me, and if someone wanted to play 3P and I'd like to interact with that group a lot, sure, I'd play, and probably house rule riders and exploration. That was the prototype review of Brink. This being sent to us did not affect scoring as usual, and as always, thank you to our patrons over here. All you guys over here, thank you guys so much. You help make videos like this possible. We also got our Madlands and Cardboard over here. Let me know what you think of this game. This is a very interesting design. It's definitely trying to do a lot of things. The whole worker placement and exploration thing seems a bit funky, but again, I'll be reading the comments. Okay, anyways, remember to like, comment, subscribe. See you guys down below. Bye-bye.